All right. Now, the discussion here is we're talking about basically quantifying everything in the Constitution respective to the constitutional framework as to ownership physics and economics, access to the Treasury, as to part of the original understanding laid out by our forefathers. So we're getting a whole bunch of economics and ownership physics as well as chronological order to understand certain types of laws and initial findings that are already standardized, for instance. Now, we're having some small problems dealing with some of these items because there is a certain amount of problems with the system in itself missing documents. Of course, if you try to get a complete a copy of the Constitution in the exact original words, it does not have it. The AI does not have it. It's also missing many other key documents. Now, surprisingly, it has a whole lot of the Marxist documents and communist documents, as well as, socialist documents. But again, those are all verified even by asking as foreign instruments, non-U.S. origin items. So we have to look at all the great land acquisitions and the understanding of the original deals of what was supposed to become eventually unlimited access to the United States Treasury and the lands that we were basically taking control of for those of us who are vested citizens. So the identification deals with different types of understanding respective to different other areas of law, respective to those of us who are vested citizens and how law protects our individual rights and procedures and ownership and other rights. Now, the thing is that there are some key problems that we're working on, and a lot of that deals with making new AIs that are going to be more accurate. Because the current problem is that, again, none of the AIs are programmed properly. They're missing key documents. This is where my archive that I spent so many decades building is so crucially important to the future of economics here for the United States and all vested citizens. Because my archive, all those decades of work, says that we're vested owners and we're entitled to stock, which is $80 million for people in Group 1 and $10 million in Group 2. So as we continue with the understanding here, we end up with a series of formulas compared to certain other original documents. So as we bring in different type of documents and assess them and then augment everything, we're putting everything into mathematics. That means all this physics writing and formulas is all about how it has to be mathematically, in order for it to work. So we're going to do big, huge economic simulations, but we can do scaled down ones, basically like games, basically. They're like a big PC game, real-time strategy. So we get to do a lot of stuff with it, including economic criminology. So as we're working with this, and we're working with our original rights and the way the laws are supposed to be, there's a whole lot of findings. For instance, the law protects us in certain ways that for some reason we have certain people that have obtained office that are violating. In other words, your family has obtained lands for years and years and years and certain rights of assets and whatnot. And you have other people that think that they can come here and obtain a vote and have somebody propose something and just basically rat pack and say, well, there's more of us, and even though none of us were here when all of the things occurred over the last, 250 years, 200 years, etc., stuff like this, there are important increment times because we have great land purchases, and the last of which occurred with Britain, World War II. And all of us are vested owners in this. It's crucially important for people to understand this. We have a bunch of people that don't understand, if your lineage goes back 75 years or more, you're definitely upper middle class. You're worth at least $10 million. If it goes back 150 years or more, you're rich. You're rich. Now, so let me step back into this. We have these people that think that they can come in as Marxist or communist or socialist, but the original agreement says that we are colonial capitalist, constitutionalizing, making this republic to facilitate our financial well-being as well as our common defense and some other different characteristics as well. So we're supposed to have unlimited access to the treasuries. We took treasury rights away from the British. The British used to have guys that would appraise anything you built, and they would also monitor the growth of communities, and they would make an appraisal on that. And they take those are there's other figures too, but those are the two primary figures that they would take back to the Crown Treasury, where they would invite bankers to come in and inspect their estimates. They lay out this report and say, here's our estimates. Now, based on this, we think it justifies us to print 50 cents on the dollar of the valuation of what is in this report. And the bankers would go through and look at it and either disagree or agree. And usually it was a defined system, let's say. For the most part, it would be a formality, for the most part. So you would have 3 independent bankers looking at it, evaluating it, and then signing off and certifying that they had inspected the packets, that the packets were essentially assessed correctly, and they were valid. And that way they would be able to collect their advisors' fees, so to speak. They would get paid. So then their sign off on this are some additional signatures, which allow the Crown's Treasury to authorize the printing of special notes. They were usually in large blocks, but that way. But the printing of notes, which would be recognized by the banks, they would go with these notes that were printed and numbered, and there was an inspection to keep trace of how many notes existed and all this stuff. And bankers, there was a certain amount of transparency. So they'd bring these notes in and say, okay, I want to cash this large note in for a smaller note. You might as well just call it, if we fast forward it, it's like a line of credit, but it's not a check. It's not a cashier's check, but it's like a cashier's check because it's actually a valued note. It's a legit treasury note, just like a dollar bill or $100 bill or whatever. So, I'm sure some of you have seen pictures of the $10,000 bills and stuff like that, and the $100,000 bills, and they did $1 million bills too. But so basically, the British would buy all of these different various goods, and with those various goods, they'd turn around and take those goods and sell them worldwide, sometimes even regardless of laws. So they could convert the goods that they just purchased, like furniture, chairs, whatever it was, again, convert it into coin, into silver, which was the primary goal. And then drag that back and place it inside the coffers of the Treasury, the Crown's Treasury. Thus, you now have a full circle event where the notes have been converted into the ability to purchase products that have been converted into coin, silver. So you now have many, many pounds of silver that have been extracted throughout the world for these products. So you have a complete rebalancing where you have metal justification. You have a liquid asset. It's copper, bronze, silver, gold. Again, the British were famous for silver. The pound is represented understanding of a pound of silver. Okay, so we decided to say, well, they were making bank off of us. In other words, everything I just described, they're not bringing any of that money back to the colonies and sharing that love. They're not sharing it so we can build better infrastructure and reroute water and build berms and dams and ponds and lakes and scratch some roads out, etc. Whatever they're not putting in for it. Then they have the audacity to stand up and say, "You people are lazy, and it costs a lot to keep these colonies. So we're going to tax the tea. We're going to start taxing you," and they tax the tea. And you had a bunch of people that walked up and talked to him and says, "Hey, look, we already know what you're doing with the notes. You're doing dot of this. You're making bank, and you just called us lazy." Well, we're also the community leaders, and we've decided that the taxes are not legal here, and any tax products coming in, like this tea you're shipping into the country here to sell us, that's not legitimate. So that's banned. It's hereby banned. As a matter of fact, it's not even allowed to be in port. And they're like, "What?" And so the guy stood on the soapbox and gathered everybody around, and people got around and they told him what's happened. They're taxing us, and they're making all this money on us. You'd already had people circulating cheat sheets explaining what the British did, how they were making all the money off of us, appraising and using our assets and our communities as assets for justification to print notes of their valuation at 50 cents on the dollar of retail. So it's like, wait a minute, what kind of tax is that? You're extracting 50% of the value in the form of an invention that you're calling a note. So they said, "No, that's it." Too much. So, finally they gathered a lot of people around, and they were really pissed off. Lots and lots of people. So they said, "Okay, now what do we do?" "Oh, well, none of that tea is legal. We've banned it right here. We've got a document. We voted. It's banned." So they went down to the docks and they went onto the ships and they chucked all that tax stamp tea coming into the country that the British brought in, whoop, into the bay, whoop, into the bay, whoop, into the bay. It's not legal. That is illegal. That is counterband. So that kind of helped the British understand our position as we were explaining to them, you are no longer allowed to make appraisals on real estate that we built, nor are you allowed to make appraisals on the sizes of our communities and consider potential taxation as also a form for you to leverage justification as a possibility. Keep in mind, a possibility. They haven't taxed yet. They're saying, but it's possible. But it's possible. See, based upon that tax possibility and the overall valuation, it's actually end up with like 8 statistics, but there's 3 major ones they're printing money on. Then they quickly convert that money into buying products, what? Wholesale. And they ship it worldwide and they sell it, sometimes regardless of loss, which is wholesale liquidation. But some of it is sold as choice. People want to see furniture. "Oh, I want first pick. I'll bid high on that." That's more than wholesale because they want first choice. They want to pick the best, most beautiful grain running on the furniture for choice. So there's a profit there's a profit built on beyond the wholesale cost. So it all gets liquidated and they quickly pull it back. It's come full circle. All the money is now in the treasury. So basically they invented a temporary situation that is potentially real, but they just made a whole bunch of money and bought it all back. They just converted it. And they're keeping it all. They're keeping all that money they just made. And they're doing what? Well, they're increasing the size of the treasury. They have silver to back up as liquid, and the paper notes are still legit as well because the silver is there to back it. So if you understand how the full loop of this process works, we stepped up and says, well, we've decided to do something else. We're taking all treasury rights and appraisal rights away from you British. You see, we're building our own treasuries, and we'll be doing our own appraisals, and we'll be making our own decisions. See, now it's an interesting thing is that based on this system, by the way, you don't actually have to tax anybody. You're good for it. In other words, we want to borrow this money, but if we can't pay it back, then we basically would have to pay. Except they're not actually borrowing it. They're using it, it's considered like a borrow, but it's not a borrow because they're using it as a valued justification to print notes. And they printed notes, again, they bought the items wholesale, they converted the items into silver, and now it's liquid. It's completely validated. So the paper notes are validated and backed by the silver that's in the treasury. So they didn't even need to tax anybody. You see my point? They didn't need to tax anybody on the potential. Those are extra statistics beyond just we appraised the value of that new structure you made that didn't exist before. Yeah, that's got an appraisal. Okay, that could be sold. We could seize it if we had to, whatever. But so that's our decision was, we're going to keep printing our own notes based upon using real estate and longevous assets, primarily real estate ideally, as basically a solid item, as solidity to justify us printing notes. And then we would do exactly the same types of processes. We would buy goods locally. And it's an interesting story to see how some of our forefathers understood how this worked. Other forefathers, by the way, they didn't understand this. They didn't understand this. They didn't understand the math of this and the banking and all this treasury stuff. So there's only a certain number of people that knew how to do this, and people had to write things by hand. They didn't have computers. They printing presses were a complicated thing. This was a very complicated thing, So it had to be done manually by hand. So our forefathers were overworked running around creating stimulus. I've explained that in several other documentary things that I've done, basically. But now the item here in understanding is we're coming to mass computer capabilities. The mass computer capabilities I've been working with for decades in segments, little segments and pieces of it, to see if the math checks. So checking how the math checks, it's going to work the same on a mass scale. And when I put all the cogs together, it's going to work. Except before I couldn't put all the cogs together because there wasn't enough compute available to do it. Guess what? Well, see, things have moved forward over the last several decades, and we now have cards that exist that never existed before. This means that we can do something. For the very first time, we can do a perfect 100% simulation of economic modeling as the original agreement was or is supposed to be. Now, unfortunately, a lot of the material was destroyed in fires. The British ran around frantically. We had a 60 years war basically. The British would run around with raid teams, and they would burn archives down. They would burn people's businesses down. They would burn their homes down. They'd burn their businesses down. They'd burn the docks. They would burn the warehouses, because the main thing that they really wanted to do was destroy the archives. They wanted to destroy the brilliance of business and the brilliance of how to utilize treasury and treasury leveraging type understanding. So there's a lot of documents that got destroyed. So there's only a certain number of fragments of documents that remain over the course of time. Now, into this, you have people who diabolically oppose the Constitution of the United States. So we've had people who've been attacking archive capabilities, spies that have been going in and saboteurs, and the government hasn't totally disclosed about all the problems, about all of the missing documents and the missing books and the mysterious fires. And people don't equate it to understand that, there was over 10,000 archival style type structures that got burned. And a lot of people say, most of them were churches. Well, yes, many of them actually were churches, but again, that was communities getting together, but they would also do something. They would collect books, And manuscripts. See, manuscripts are very important. They'd also collect all kinds of different personalized books about economics and business. You see, so they haven't, now who's been doing this? Well, Marxist, communist, and socialist diabolically oppose the United States and the Constitution and our methodology. See, so they're completely against the way we would do things. So they wanted to destroy everything. That's a standardized Marxist practice and communist practice. Destroy history, destroy all their history, and replace it with something you're inventing. So beyond just the archives getting attacked, they would also fabricate false copies, modified copies. They would fabricate false information and pan it off as though it was genuine, when in fact they had molested the material because they have a long-term underlying purpose. So this is something that happens and has been in war happening because we fought 2 wars with the Royal German Empire. And the Royal German Empire, of course, paid financially for Lenin to go to Russia. In fact, Marx was on the payroll as a spy, and they paid to develop a lot of his stuff. A lot of his documents were bought and paid for. He was not that prolific. He couldn't create all those items. Many people helped him, literally to the point where things were created and brought to him, and he just had to copy them by hand verbatim. So yeah, there was these universities that were military universities and intelligence buildings, and they did all this stuff, And they also controlled information. They gave information to Lenin. Lenin gave information to Joseph Stalin. Joseph Stalin had incredibly accurate information on census, medical records, psychology, the identities of all personalized information of people. So he set brand new world records going out committing genocide, basically murdering entire population of towns and stuff like that. So this was, just horrible. But this was the weaponization of data. See, this is important to understand. So now we're at the point where we get to quantify everything mathematically and make these vast economic simulation machines, where basically it becomes very hard for people to try to justify the logic of what they're doing, because colonial capitalism being constitutionalized is a builder philosophy. Marxist communism and socialism is a criminal philosophy. It's a destroyer philosophy. Go uptown and jack the rich folks. In other words, don't create stimulus, just go steal it as fast as you can. So the differences of the activities of the mindsets of what people do are revealed. This is why our original there's no taxation and all this other stuff. We didn't need taxation because we took away the treasury. We took the treasury options away from the British Crown. And we are stockholders in the republic. We don't have a democracy. We have a republic, and we ourselves want the republic to also accommodate us as though it is also a conduit as an East Indies style company, or conduit to whoever's going to sub out the tasks are going to be performed. And this was done by our forefathers. So there's a whole bunch of people that don't understand. We're supposed to get a cut. Let me say this again for those of you who might be a little slow. We are supposed to get a cut. In other words, I described what the British did. They did this thing with the notes. They bought the wholesale goods. They sent it abroad. They auctioned it off. They sold it. It turned to coin. That's profit. None of that existed before. That's all pure profit. We're supposed to get a cut. You see? Yeah. See, we're supposed to get a cut off that activity in generalized stock. See, we're supposed to get residuals. Okay, we're supposed to have land rights, land staking rights. We're also supposed to get dividends. There's all this stuff that's supposed to have. We have a republic. We're stockholders. Public servants are just that. They are public servants. And they get temporarily elected to service us for our financial betterment. They're going to be the managers. What is this? Well, we want to try to get the people that are smart and know how to use a pencil and a pen and know how to count and work things, as opposed to people who don't know how to read and write. I mean, does this click, click, click? Does this make sense to anybody? Of course it makes sense. So the understanding here is that we have people that have been at war with us. Marxism has been, and communism have been at war with the United States for more than 100 years. Socialism's been at war real close to that, like 90 some years. Now, Marxism, communism, socialism are all child organization corporations created initially by finance and other assistance by the Royal German Empire and their various syndicate partners. Some of them you might label as oligarchs. So the important thing here is we as vested citizens designed a system and a way to continuously do vetting of newcomers. I'll say it again, to be able to continuously do vetting of newcomers. Now, this is a bit of a process because you can only vet a certain number of people because you have to make sure that you maintain control. Because as you vet people in, you have to start sharing other things with them, other types of opportunity. The opportunities to buy land or maybe stake land if we decide to allow that. And, there's other types of opportunities. But we want to vet them. We want to make sure we screen them and make sure that they fit and make sure that they're going to be what? Loyal to the Constitution of the United States. And the Constitution of the United States endorses colonial capitalism being constitutionalized. In other words, colonial constitutional capitalist. It is capitalism, our way with the republic, that is supposed to be done, our bidding to be done. So there's a lot of things that didn't happen. We didn't get our shares printed because excuses were made. We had a 60-year wars. We had all these attacks on archives. Not to mention, guys would say things from time to time like, well, it's expensive to print that much custom paper to print real stock notes. And then to distribute them and mail them to each citizen, that's a nightmare. Just to do that on a scale, it's just going to be a nightmare. But someday we'll be able to do that. You see, someday the cost of paper will come down and printing presses will get cheaper. They'll run faster. They'll be able to print more. We'll be able to do this eventually. And our treasury at first, well, it's not working so well. We got a 60-year wars. We have to keep coming up with money. But eventually this is all going to work. Well, you see, there's these greedy, evil people. Many of them are, they're foreign instruments or connected to foreign instruments that wanted to assassinate. They assassinated and they poisoned many of our leadership. Again, and they burned their archives and stole their books and destroyed their books and made false copies that they molested and placed into various places because they had a long-term goal to overthrow the United States. So if you're going to use Marxism, communism, or socialism to overthrow a country, you would be diabolically opposing an understanding that vested citizens, true vested citizens, as opposed to immigrants, which would be different, true vested citizens are stockholders in the republic itself. Well, if you're stockholders and you're supposed to have unlimited access to the treasury, but let's just call it, well, there's a reality it's not going to work. We can't let everybody have access to $10 million today. And somebody says, well, what is the number? Someone says, we equated it. $228,000 can be available, but there's a catch. You have to build from scratch a new piece of real estate. And that will continue to self-perpetuate, because when you build a new piece of real estate, we get to justify the printing of notes. We take the notes, we go to various people who are furniture makers or crop producers, whatever your product is, whatever it is, and we just buy a whole bunch of it and we ship it and liquidate it and convert it to what? To silver. Yes, we convert it to silver and then bring that into the treasury, and that justifies and balances out yet again an additional way. So number one, we have solidity is real estate. And the real estate that's getting created. That's solidity number one. Solidity number two is a doubling value factor of coin, of silver coming into the warehouse. See how that works? See how that works really, really nice? So we have different types of avenues. There were other things I would explain more in depth, obtaining technology, saw blades, different types of things are longevous and hold value very well, like firearms, okay? Cannons, firearms, these things actually hold value fairly well. So there's a lot of other things into this as well. So, but I'm giving you the base understanding. So communists and socialists don't want to see vested citizens get their stock issued. See, today we've recovered. Today our treasury is healthy. We have no problem banking people to build massive amounts of homes for themselves or small businesses or whatever. This can be done fairly. We can equate it. So it's not enough to do this much for everyone, but we can do this other increment right. Oh, $348,000 per person. Well, yes. So, there's a catch. You have to build a new home with it. Wow. Okay, because then it's solid, because, we're going to build for 70 cents on the dollar of retail. There's a 30% equity zone almost instantly. And then, of course, you're paying yourself to do part of the work, which means technically it's almost like you're getting a hold of this house at half of the retail value, but it's also our treasury that's also going to work and give us time to make payments on a certain reasonable schedule, okay? And reschedule loans if we need to. And keep in mind, once we create that asset, see, then the next series